Okay, tell me about it.
My belief is, I'm wrong, this is an XCN car. It now been used as a day coach for a time, but looking at the double valances in the window suggests that there were pairs here. There may have been bulkheads. Yes, as you look overhead, this was probably a sleeper like the last one that would have had bulkheads coming up to here and up, pull down uppers. But it has been years since that. I'm quite sure that in their service it has been used as a day coach. But you can usually tell because day coaches that were built as such have their windows at an even spacing. But when we've got the pairs closely like this, it's very often because they were berth or bedroom sections. So this car has been largely open-ended. It's been an entertainment bar and musician. They put a stage at the other end for the Alberta Prairie Rail excursions. I'm not sure when they start their operation in a few weeks whether they'll actually be doing entertainment live. I know in Via they're not doing that yet because of the COVID thing. And on the walls are pictures of some of the different artists and people who have been in movies and entertainment along the way. And what again tells me that this was probably a sleeping car at the other end is when we reach the end and we see all of a sudden the central corridor moves to the side. So that was a mark of what was often a sleeping car, or at least a luxury lounge, and they built their stage here, and it leads you to the other end of the car.
Interesting. This is
Truck door works.
Yeah, that's gonna work. Oh, this part's already open. So I'll just close it then.
That's right, you have to get the door. You have to open that from the outside there and pull it in. You got it? And it fits right back there. Now you step on the button. Good show. There is our trap door down. We don't have a stool in this car, but that's the way down.
cool.
There was a series of two shorts when the train was standing was to begin immediately. So, and you'd hear a rush, you'd go, psh, psh. It didn't make a loud whistle you couldn't hear, but there was a little whistle in the locomotive cab under the engineer's seat. So I remember if a train was pulling out, and if you heard this beep, beep, that was the conductor telling us to go. Two shorts was an immediate signal. If the train was running and there were two shorts, that meant stop immediately. 3 were to back up. 4 was to apply the brakes. So they had their signals. Some CN, before radios, the locomotive whistle would actually blow back to tell the conductor they'd received the message. CP didn't do that. They just sent the messages one way. Because I remember waiting to see if the whistle was going to blow on the platform. No, when the engineer got the message, he would simply put the train in motion or do whatever he had to do.
Tell me what we're about to see.
All right, this is the electrical lighting cabinet for a day car. So you can see the knife switches that are there for the different lighting zones. And the big 3 switches at the top, one is for the light, the one in the middle is for the lights for the whole car. It's like master for these. The one on the right, I believe, is the train line connection. In other words, if your batteries are low, you can jumper to another car and cut that in. And the one on the third one would be for the fans, the ventilating system. And here's a little chart that said when they were last maintained, electrical department. Be interesting to see if I can get that out and put it back in again with a dropping of dust. So here's a newer one, 12-month period. The latest dates, okay, 29/08/1990. So we're talking 31, almost 31 years ago that this was last maintained. And let's see, the removed from the, if it says the depot here, 6-month period, 12 months, it should identify the coach. This one does 4995, that was 1987. So they had a routine maintenance program that they did all the time, so these things didn't get away on them.
Okay, moving along.
So I don't know whether these all being other celebrities, whether or not you choose to stuff there, but
Yeah, I'll get those shots for
you
sure.
can tell again the original profile of the car where the ceiling drops here. So there would have been another room. This is giving me my clue, what this was. This would have been the same type of floor plan of the car that we were in the CP there, a 12 and 1. It would have had 12 sections, upper and lower berths. And this would have been the start to the drawing room. The corridor would have come around the end here, and the drawing room would have had its own washroom, and it would have been 3 beds in there enclosed. So that, I guess, is two cars from the same body, one that's been retained in the traditional configuration, and this one that's been turned into an open area car. And back at this end, where the last berths would have been, where there's a change, there would have been a washroom area here for men at one end and women at the other. Generally, the men's would have been at the front end of the car here with their toilet there and thing, and the women would have been back beyond the drawing room, then powder room. The men's area outside the washroom was called a smoking room in an era when it was only men who smoked generally, and then the women's was called a powder room where they put on makeup. Now we're training our steps. Here is the smoking room. That's fine. Here is the smoking room in the car that's still maintained that way. And pretty close to what would have been its vintage condition. You can see that it was also a wash area. The actual toilet is just around the corner outside. This was a throwaway for paper cups, and they decided they didn't want to have to empty that because they're not using the washroom in the day service anymore. So you could basically shave. There's a place for razor blades to be deposited there. People cleaned up and made ready in the daytime. And when there was a full car, unlike now where they actually save a berth section and very often a room for each of the VIA staff, the porter would put his mattress down and sleep on the couch in the smoking room here. And have to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning before the earliest passengers. And the other thing in the day with the smoking room, or at least when that room was being used by other passengers, the porter, and this stool, there it is. So your porter would basically sit on the stool when he was waiting to receive instructions or requests from people.
Stay there for a second. I want to shoot it from here.
I'm sitting in what was the traditional porter's stool. Before the porters had a reserved area, they would sleep on the couch in the smoking room at the nighttime, and in the daytime, they weren't to be taking up passenger space. They could fold down this little stool until they got a call for service, in which case they would immediately get up, pull the stool out of the way, and go to take the call. And we can see right here in the end, this is what's called the annunciator panel. I don't think there's battery service at the moment for this in here, but there was a battery that maintained this. Whenever there was a call, this tells you all the areas in the car, the berth sections and the rooms, and this would drop down by magnetic thing. The porter would know where he was being called. They were he's there. We didn't have she's as porters until the 1980s, I believe, in Canada with VIA. And then you would push the button that the call had been answered. And if at nighttime, or if the porter was going for a meal, the deal with the next car is, all right, I'll spell you off and you spell me off. So they would actually run a jumper cable for the bell between the two cars. We'll look at those in a minute in the end here. And the jumper cable did not carry enough lines to actually tell what section the call was coming from the other car. But the porter who was covering the car, Leo, if his bell rang but it didn't show the thing or it indicated another car, he would go into the other car and check the annunciator panel to see where the call was coming from. So we can go back into, retrace our steps here. But in the vestibule between, there's a number of patents that were developed by George Mortimer Pullman, and they include this type of thing called a buffer or a step plate. There's a heavy loaded, spring loaded, very heavy loaded metal plate that's called a diaphragm here, and that means you can pass between the cars. Look between the cracks here, because as that moves, there is a crack. Now, there's no way with a moving train you want to get your fingers into that area. It would fly. It would basically destroy your hand. So that's why they built this. These are called vestibule curtains, and they go either way from each car, and they tie onto the tailgate so that if somebody's walking between and they need to put their hand out there, they cannot put it into the area where they could get mangled. And the tailgates here are, if it's the last car, of course, you don't have to worry about the vestibule curtains. You put it across to close the thing off. Now overhead here are there's two jumper cable things. There's not a large chair. That would be if the batteries were low in one car, you would run this into the next car so that you could maintain power. I don't see in the bracket here, but there's the small cable here, which is for the porter's bell. But we just looked at the board. So this would plug in here, I believe. And it would, except that this car, because it's a day coach now, no longer has that type of thing. But it would tie in up here, and they would have put a little thing to hold it up so it didn't fall in. So that was basically the interconnection between the cars when the bells. And one of the things, if you were switching cars in a station, like a car was coming off the train, because certain sleepers didn't run the full length. When the later days of the Transcontinental with Via, there were certain cars that would be, say, Regina, Saskatchewan. They would come in the middle of the night and pick up a sleeper for Calgary or for Winnipeg, depending on the direction. So the passengers would board before that. So when they arrived at the other station, one of the things that the staff have to do before the cars are uncoupled is to make sure that any jumper cables between the cars are removed up above, and the curtains are closed. And then it was the carman, the porter on board, who would do this, the carman underneath, who would check to make sure that the brake hoses and all those things were separated before they separated the cars. Much higher in the next car, you see it. When they air conditioned this car in 1945, they lowered the ceiling, and the air vents now pass through there. So the perforated ceiling you get is there's air that comes down from there, and the honeycombs that you see, or the little things in each berth, that's ducts that come down, and the outside looks like ribs, and that carries the air to the berth so you don't get stale air. And I'm going to put that on right now so we've got our ventilation working. Now if you put your hand near here, it should, now let's turn it off. We can turn it to, there should be air coming through here.
Let's go.
I'm not getting it here, see if it's